Okay, this is Dave Winkler. It's Naval Historical Foundation's Author History Book Reviews Author Chats. And today we have John Fast Morton. We're going to talk a little bit about a book that was not published recently, but back in 2003, Mustin, a naval family of the 20th century. And I think you can make the argument after we talk today, a family of the 21st century. Now, a little bit about, and the reason why we're doing this is that there's going to be a change of command tomorrow at the Washington Navy Yard where John Mustin is going to assume command of the Navy Reserve. And in doing so, he'll attain the rank of Vice Admiral. That's going to be the third generation in the family that attains that, and that's quite an accomplishment in the Navy. So the Naval Historical Foundation is going to be doing a second Saturday where John's going to talk a little bit about the history of the Mustin family based off this book. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the Navy Reserve based off a book I wrote back in 2014. But what I want to do today is to talk to John a little bit about, what's the significance of the family legacy and a little bit about, how he came about writing the book. First of all, John is not a historian by trade, but he's an analyst. He works right now for Gryphon Technologies, Team Blue, and he does homeland security analysis. And has done a lot of work on behalf of the Navy over the years on a lot of issues that are germane to the nation's security at present. This is a book, Next Generation Homeland Security, that was published by the Naval Institute Press back in 2012. And for folks who are interested in that type of subject, and it's very germane today, I recommend you go out and get it. But getting back to the question of why he got into this book, it's kind of going to focus on that ship there, the USS Mustin, which was commissioned, I guess now about almost 2 decades ago. And we're going to be talking a little bit about his family tradition. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing this screen. And there he is, John Morton.
Hey, Dave. Well, thanks for having me on board. And great to be with you all and the folks with the Naval Historical Foundation. I guess you were asking me to start off with how I came to write the book. My good friend, Colonel John Miller, who was with the Naval Institute Proceedings, Marine Colonel, he was approached by United Defense and the Mustin family to write this book in 2000. And I'd known John and worked for the Naval Institute really going back to 1985 when he first came aboard to work with Fred Rainbow on Proceedings. John's a published author, or was a published author. He's no longer with us now. But he called me up in about January or February 2000 and said, "Hey, John, I have been offered to write this book about your family for the commissioning of the USS Mustin, which will be commissioned in 2003. But I can't do it. I'm just too darn busy. And I think since you're related to the Mustins, you'd be perfect to write this." Well, I smiled and I said, "Well, truly, John, yeah, I mean, these folks I've grown up with all my life, but I don't write books. I write articles for Proceedings and other defense publications, and have been doing so for many years. And, writing a book is not in my wheelhouse." And he said, "Hey, John, it's a piece of cake. You just regard it as a long article." Well, that's how I got roped into it. Lloyd Mustin, the second Mustin, first Vice Admiral, was Naval Academy class of 32. And he married my father's sister, Emily Morton Mustin. Dad was in the class of 33, and he and Lloyd were not classmates. Dad was 1 year behind, but they were on the swimming team. And so that's how his sister Emily met Lloyd, and they were sort of at love at first sight. And so our families were really joined at the hip all through the careers of Lloyd and my father, and they were both flag officers. And you had many times together, Thanksgivings, Christmases, graduations, commissionings, changes of command. It was a wonderful relationship between the two branches of the family. And even though I'm a Morton and not a Mustin, we were all, as I say, very close. And I was able to observe Lloyd, who after my father died really took me under his wing and mentored me when I came to Washington in 1984 and started up in my my defense journalism career. And I really owe to Lloyd, a lot of the insights that I was able to carry through my consulting and analytical career really to this very day. As for Hank, I have to say that Emily, my aunt, his mother, always spoke of Hank as somebody who was born with his feet on the ground. And he was a wonderful elder cousin to me. I was born in 47, he was born in 33, but Hank was always the kind of guy who was there to encourage you, to bring you along, to cheer for you when you were playing football, if he was in town. And I remember him coming over frequently when Dad was at the Pentagon and we were living on Fort Scott Drive, and encouraging me as I was training to make the varsity football team in my high school, which I did. And Hank was the kind of guy that, gave pointers on how best to lift weights and get strong and, do all the right things. A great family. And I was very honored by John Miller and the Naval Institute to be able to write this book.
So talk a little bit about, what is kind of like the, you got 4 generations, starting with Henry the First, who was, I guess, Naval Aviator number 11, I guess class of, was that 1896?
1896, indeed.
And then you had his son Lloyd, who you talked about. Of course, his son Henry, your cousin, and then now you got John, and there's actually, I guess, a 5th generation out there, Link.
Yes, indeed. That's Lloyd Mustin II.
Yes.
Who's a naval reservist, or had been a naval reservist, retired as an 06. And Link went to the University of Richmond, right, and went into OCS right after he graduated. And I believe that was in 1983 or thereabouts. And Link had a stellar career as a reservist. Yeah.
So anyway, let's talk a little bit about what are some of the consistencies from generation to generation about the Mustins.
Well, it's an extraordinary family and a lineage, and when you get to meet or be around all the Mustins, whatever generation you're talking about, and I have to also include the women who are very dynamic and charismatic, I should say, and accomplished women in their own right. There's a Mustin gene that's at work there. And when I was writing the book, I was kind of trying to put together, I think, what was the sort of character traits that they all seemed to share, which made them very effective as naval officers. And in many ways, they imparted to the people that were around them in their various commands. And I'd say there were 4 commonalities which run through the family. Definitely fortitude. They were powerful men, not necessarily, tall. They were all pretty much under 6 feet. But I can tell you, when they walked through a crowd, or the seas parted, they had absolute command presence. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that was sort of behind this is they had very implicit confidence in what they were doing, because they had extremely strong intellects. They studied hard, they did their preparation, they grounded their approach to solving every problem and rising to every challenge, applying real brain power. And so the intellect was very much a part of it. The other is that they were great athletes in many ways, whether it was football in the case of Henry C. Mustin, or swimming in the case of Lloyd, but they all played, at various stages in their careers, maybe not at the varsity level in college, but they were football players. I remember Hank was so thrilled when his eldest grandson became of age where he could throw a baseball back and forth. And so Hank would go out buying Nick Mustin Miller his first baseball glove, and Hank got a new one for himself for the express purpose of, pitching back and forth a baseball. I mean, that was kind of part of, the upbringing for all of them. And related directly to their naval careers, they all had, at a very early age, close quarters combat experience. In the case of Henry C. Mustin and Hank Mustin, and also Hank's brother Tom, who was class of 62 at the Academy, they were in small boats in the Philippine insurrection and in Vietnam. Henry C. had command of the Samar, which was a prize Spanish gunship, where he took on amphibious operations in support of the Army offshore. And, he saw close quarters combat, having come into that from being at the Battle of Santiago, serving on the flagship there for Admiral Sampson, the armored cruiser New York. In the case of Lloyd, very quickly, when he got out to the South Pacific in 1942 on the Atlanta, he found himself in Iron Bottom Sound in the battles around Guadalcanal and Savo Island. And unfortunately, the Atlanta was egregiously damaged in a night action. It was a melee of two fleets colliding. Lloyd was the assistant gunnery officer. That ship had to be scuttled and sunk. And, that was where he really got bloodied. And from there, he went on and served on Willis Lee's staff and saw the Battle of the Pacific, really in some heavy actions in Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, of course. So he was, as a gunnery expert, dealing with the kamikazes and Baka bombs and the rest of what the Japanese, in a very desperate time for them, were throwing at us. I mentioned Hank and Vietnam. In the case of John Mustin, John returned to active duty for 2 years when he had command of an inshore boat unit that went to Kuwait. And I think it was 2004, 2005. So that was in, extremis, where some serious activity, even though pretty much the operation in Iraq had completed, still, they were in harm's way. And so John had command in that environment, as I say, of, ribs, small boats. So that carried on. I want to say a few things about what all of them stressed, and I can tell you from firsthand, as applies to Hank and Lloyd. They saw naval officers not as managers, which is a little bit nuanced, I think. But I think any naval officer understands that a lot of the Navy is management, a lot of its acquisition and programs and what have you, which tends to detract in some ways from that sort of warrior mentality. Hank and Lloyd, I can tell you, saw that a naval officer is a warrior first. And so when they got into that sort of program area and acquisition, they always were driving the bus to the extent they could, representing the warfighter's perspective and making decisions or putting input in things like, for example, Admiral Zumwalt's CNO's executive board dealing with the surface ship requirements. It was like, hey, no, we're making the decisions, or we want to make the decisions based on what is practicable in terms of a warfighter and what the warfighting needs will be by the fleet, as it is doing what a fleet does, which is being combat ready and, if necessary, going to war. So that was very much a part of how they saw things. In Hank's case, he always saw issues as a junior officer, and he was becoming a department head and CO, as the naval officer, as being an engineer with a technical expertise, so that he, nobody could snow him when it came down to the deck plates and he was interacting with his chiefs and his department heads, because he knew how the thing worked. And that was very important, and he inherited that from Lloyd, and I'm sure Lloyd inherited that from Henry C. The other thing is, we're talking about naval officers, people at sea and ships. And not to be forgotten, even though it's all about putting ordnance on target, the fundamental skill of a naval officer rising to command is ship handling. And they were all magnificent ship handlers that took great pride in doing that. And if you will, passing that on to everybody that was in their charge in their ship, in the ship's company. The officers I know, in the case of Lloyd Mustin, he had inherited this insight, I would say, not only from his father, but from Chester Nimitz, who was his first CO when he got out of the Naval Academy. And I always remember Lloyd saying that Nimitz's approach to command was to make every junior officer on board his ship capable to stand, as officer of the deck underway. And I know Lloyd took great pride in passing that kind of tradition on to his officers when he had his first command, the Kepler. He wanted to have every officer, capable of serving underway, and especially when you got into things like underway replenishment. Lloyd loved to just be out there on the flying bridge, but delegating to a young JO the responsibilities of all the rudder commands and everything that was necessary while you were replenishing your ship, because it was noticed by the ship's company, the EMs at every level, that, hey, young Winkler, he's running the show right now. It's not the old man. I mean, this is a big deal. It's good for morale all around. When you have a command structure that takes responsibility and executes, it's just, hey, it's the buy-in and it's the morale structure. The other thing is competitive training. Lloyd Mustin was particularly big on competitive training. And a lot of the ships that he was on, he was able to, and so was Hank, elevate the ship to getting the ease for whether it's engineering or gunnery or what have you. And they just drilled and drilled and drilled. I remember Lloyd telling me about his time in the Miami, a light cruiser, where he came aboard and the guns were not calibrated properly. He just went through the whole department, working with the gunnery officer to train all these gun crews to work with fire control. And then, of course, when the Miami saw its first action, it was like the difference between night and day. They had a phenomenal track record in terms of hits and applying, rocking the rocking bridge and all the various means to get ordnance on target. And that was Lloyd, and I think he might have inherited a lot of that from his father, Henry C., who was very much a disciple of the great William Sims, who was the inspector of target practice and learned all about continuous aim from Percy Scott out in the Far East, really in the aughts, very early on, because the dirty little secret of the Spanish-American War is that, our gunnery was not particularly good. We were very, very lucky, and the British knew about it. And Sims was one of the guys that formed a relationship with Percy Scott and kind of learned how to improve things. And Theodore Roosevelt and the Navy establishment brought him on board to be the inspector of target practice, and Mustin was part of that, the first Mustin.
Right.
So I don't know. That's in a nutshell, I think, what the Mustin tradition is and where it comes from. All of those things to serve combat readiness and the ability for officers as they move through their career from being JOs to senior 05s and 06s with, scrambled eggs on their visor, that they have the ability to command. Great family. I mean, the tradition continues, and John Mustin, new chief of the Naval Reserves, I know is going to be continuing that tradition in a big way.
Well, that's an excellent preview to this Saturday's second Saturday program for the Naval Historical Foundation. If folks don't have the opportunity to register at the Naval Historical Foundation's website, they will have the opportunity afterwards to view it on the Naval Historical Foundation's YouTube site, because we're going to be preserving the program. Let me just, in closing, just say that your book here, I used it. I had the privilege last year to be the class of '57 chair of naval heritage at the Naval Academy, and I used your book as a textbook for the plebes, because you have your standard Bradford history book of naval history, and it's a great narrative. But this really brought it real to the mids. They were able to relate through the Mustins, the challenges, expectations through multiple generations throughout the 20th century. So it was a perfect complement to the standard Navy narrative. So I'm grateful for that.
I'm so glad to hear that, Dave, because really that was the intent of the book, and I was delighted that Admiral Clark, Vern Clark, when he was CNO, put that book on the CNO's recommended reading for leadership and management. And yeah, I mean, I wanted to impart what I had imparted by Lloyd and Hank, what is kind of their example to the young men and women that are coming up either as midshipmen or junior officers. And I'm just delighted that in a small part of the universe that you were able to do that. For how many years were you there at the Academy? One?
Yeah, just this past year.
That's outstanding, and I hope they took it all in.
Yeah. So anyway, for a rookie book effort there, you really hit it out of the park, and congratulations, and we look forward to seeing the second Saturday program this Saturday, and we'll stay in touch.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay, take care.
All right.